What got you into journalism? Like, why is that the path that you chose, and positives, negatives?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. So in high school, I remember before I entered my high school in Santa Maria, I became aware that it had a film and video program that was actually really, really good. And I saw like my sister dated a guy who had a video he'd made that included special effects and all this other stuff. We're talking in the early, 2000s, the aughts, right? And so I was just from day one, if I knew when I got to that high school, I wanted to get into that program. And so I did. And funny enough, now that I think about it, the first time I ever engaged in journalism was in the broadcast class at my film and video program. You had to do 1 year of intro, and then you could do advanced filmmaking and then broadcast class. So not only did I do reporting on my high school about like this new principal had come, and we all kind of saw her as an authoritarian, and she had put up all these extra surveillance cameras around the campus, put bars around the whole campus.
Dang.
Yeah. And so I did reporting on that, me and a friend of mine. And I was also being into film and filmmaking. Of course, I was one of those Hunter S. Thompson fan bro
Oh yeah.
kids, and so after seeing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and all of that, and getting to know who he was, I was just reading a lot of his work, fascinated by how, as a journalist, he would center himself in the story and tell it from his point of view, not being afraid to do that. That's what gonzo journalism originally meant. People tend to think it means you lie about things and you twist the truth, which he did in some cases, to spin a narrative, like in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Right.
But I mean, if you go read Hell's Angels, that's an example of him, centering himself in the story, because he really was hanging out with the Hell's Angels. He got himself like some crazy motorcycle and was riding around with them. And they kind of understood this is like a hippie journalist who wants to write a book about us. So they had him hang around until they ended up chain whipping him almost nearly to death.
Dang.
Yeah. And so it's a fascinating story. And I was just like reading him voraciously. And then the dude offed himself while I was in school. And so out of a sense of, I got to do something, man, I went to the school paper, and I met a really influential teacher there as well. I had these two really great mentors in my film and broadcasting class. I actually wanted to edit films before I got into journalism. And but then, I got into journalism. One of my first pieces for the school paper was a gonzo piece where I went to this, there was like a hardcore show at a church, like that kind of screamcore music. And
Nice.
some kid had taken like a whole box of over-the-counter cough medicine. It was
Nice.
like codeine in it or something. Yeah. And so the cops and paramedics ended up coming. So I did a write-up about that, and it caused a whole controversy. And it was just, something that church didn't want known, and that not even none of the, area media got involved in or looked at, or covered it all. But could have found out about it if they'd done some work. But I covered it at the school paper. My teacher went to bat for me like an editor would,
Nice.
when the big powerful interests come to squash a story or
Right.
have you retracted or whatever. And so it was just an experience for me that was like a formative one that showed me that, wow, so we have this institution here in town that is very actively wanting to control its image, and and just based on feelings I had about certain things in institutions, and maybe I was forming my politics at the time, I don't have a lot of trust for those types of institutions in general, right?
Same. Yeah.
And and so I saw them actively trying to control how they were perceived and how journalism could kind of peel back a bit of the facade that institutions put up. We also had a private school, a catty corner to us, Catholic private school, that, I mean, a few years later ended up having a whole scandal where a couple of female students were raped by a student, and the principals, who are also priests, covered it up, and they ended up, I think being charged because they're mandatory reporters. And so, and just all these things that can happen, that so journalism can uncover things and show you what's going on in your community, things you might not be aware about. But also I do believe in somewhat in the idealism of, we are setting the historical record in real time. When historians go to study a time and a place, one of the first things they do is look to local media and see, what was being said in the paper about such and such event. Letters to the editor, how did it affect people, how do they feel about it,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, because people don't realize that they assume that. I mean, while it is true that like the old saying of like the winners write the history books. That
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
said, historians that are, yes, obviously there is bias in everything, in media, in
Yeah.
books, in whatever. But
Yeah.
when people are doing, like, historians and anthropologists are doing the work that, like, their due diligence, yeah,
Yeah.
most of their first what is the term, their their initial evidence, right,
Mhm.
is their primary evidence. That's what it is, primary source evidence.
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
looking at those direct, quote unquote, like grassroots type efforts to understand how people in those specific scenarios felt at the time, what their motivations, perspectives were. Because the reality is that while we tend to view history in a macro way, those little micro, it matters that we understand why people act in a way at a specific time in history, and we contextualize that correctly if we want to be able to fully understand what's going on. And
Yeah.
local journalists allow that to happen.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and it's interesting how you can, go back to a newspaper from 100 years ago, and you can read the bias. You can see the. I remember I saw a cover of the, I live in Santa Maria, the Santa Maria Times at our local historical society. They had a cover of that paper from years and years ago. Possibly before my father was born, even. And it had a part of just the name of the paper, and the top letterhead of the paper said the missile capital of the world. And we have Vandenberg Air Force
Oh,
Base
okay, that's right. I
near
was about to say, I
Lompoc.
was like,
Yeah, not far from here. And they were just trying, or it was like the rocket capital or something.
right.
They,
No, yeah.
yeah,
No,
because it,
Vandenberg's. So, quick what an
sure,
insertion here. Yeah,
yeah,
I actually. So when I was in college, I worked full time at UPS in a warehouse. But then my last year in school, I knew I wanted to work with something space involved, and for that, you end up having to apply for like certain security things, and
oh yeah, yeah,
it costs money. For a company to pay for, or you have to individually
mhm,
pay for it. So that's why if you can get an internship with a company that will get it for you, it helps you
of
with
course.
negotiating. And so when I was my last year in school, I actually worked at the Missile Defense Center in
Well,
Huntsville, Alabama.
there you
And
go.
so
Oh yeah,
Vandenberg and Huntsville, those are like the two biggest ones. And so Huntsville is an example. Most people think of Alabama as middle of nowhere south. And for the most
not
part,
Huntsville.
yeah, not Huntsville. Huntsville's
Yeah,
the only place I've seen a Sprouts and a Whole Foods in the rural South that's not in a
yeah.
maximum metropolitan area like Atlanta.
It's funny. My mom and stepdad worked as contractors, IT contractors, out on Vandenberg, and now they live in a suburb of Huntsville.
Yeah, Matt, it's Huntsville's great. I wanted to move to California because, like, if you're 24 years old at the time and you
Hmm.
can go live by, near the beach in Southern California, what's the
Why
question?
not?
Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No debate.
Huntsville's amazing. Anyway, just wanted to mention that in there because, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, go
just
ahead.
really quick, my point was Santa Maria has always, or for a long time, has been a bedroom community for Vandenberg in a lot of ways, and because it's so close, and so is Lompoc, of course. But the interesting thing is that this newspaper, the Santa Maria Times, the local paper, just openly celebrated in its letterhead, the military industrial complex, because it was, such a vital part of the local economy,
And this was
that they
also,
they just openly celebrated
and
it,
also,
right?
what year was this?
I mean, this is decades and decades. This is
Is
like
this
a
Cold War?
generation ago. It might have been post-war. It
Okay.
might be the 50s,
That's what the
or
reason
maybe
I'm
even
asking is
earlier than
because
that.
we got to keep in mind, McCarthyism, Cold War. There was a lot of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, but that's just so I did want to just mention that, in the context of every time and place has its bias, it has its leaning.
Of course.
For instance, we were going through this pandemic, right? And a generation ago or 100 years ago, we had a pandemic that was known as the Spanish flu.
Right.
And it did not start in Spain. The only reason that it's called the Spanish flu is, and that people assumed it was from Spain, was because there was World War I at the time, and the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and everybody on every side of the war had a national security impetus to not publicize the fact that there was a pandemic virus ripping through their
Yep.
troops. Yeah, and except there was one country that had freer media laws, or that had a less restrictive government over the media, and that was Spain. And so everybody went, well, Spain keeps talking about it. It must be
I
the Spanish flu, right?
Yeah, and I thought that was hilarious whenever, you have people say like China virus and stuff like that, and they're like,
Yeah,
and then they'll
that's
pretend to try and say that, oh, well, I'm just describing where it came from. Didn't we call, and I love it when they do that, where they're like,
yeah,
didn't we call Spanish flu because it came from, no, it came from Kansas, you idiot. Like,
yeah,
it,
yeah,
it, it
yeah.
literally, that's the most agreed upon historically place of origin is Kansas.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
so
oh man.
hey, this whole like China virus thing, it's literally a repeat of what happened then. Like,
Exactly. And it relies on jingoism and nationalism and of
absolutely.
course racism and all those things.
If you enjoyed this clip, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out the full live version of the Wealth for 99 podcast, where we talk finance, economics, and public policy from a working class perspective. We'll see you there.